The U.S. nuclear deal with Iran has caused great concern here in Israel and across the Middle East about the rise of an empowered Iran. Our CBN News Roundtable continues with those topics.
Do you see this as an opportunity for Israel realizing the consequences of this treaty, that in essence that this gives Israel perhaps the green light to defend itself?
Well, Israel will take that green light. Prime Minister Netanyahu drew the red lines several years ago, and I think Israelis across the political spectrum are blasting this deal. It doesn't take much when you have people like Ahmadinejad and Rouhani and Ayatollah Khamenei saying, we want to wipe out Israel, and you do it over a period of decades. It doesn't take much for a government to say, we will respond to this. And Israel has to respond to this. And what it's going to do is jumble the alliances all around the world, and it puts the whole world, and especially the Middle East as a region, in real danger of an all-out conflict.
Does this give impetus to Saudi Arabia to say, listen, if the Iranians can have a nuclear bomb, acquire a nuclear bomb, why can't we?
Well, certainly.
And could this lead to an arms race in the region?
It is the start of an arms race in the Middle East, and John Kerry was not listening to what our allies in the Middle East were telling him. They're saying this is going to lead to an arms race in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia will now try to develop a nuclear weapon, and you also have other Sunnis that are still battling against the Shiites, not only in Syria, but also in Lebanon. What about Hezbollah? And the billions of dollars, the billions in being able to resell oil now, and also the frozen assets being lifted, Iran will have a lot of money for more weaponry, for making war.
To that point also, Eric Stakelbeck in Washington, D.C., you look at the growing influence that the Iranians have today, whether it's in Yemen, in Syria. Does this give them, with this extra surplus of billions of dollars of cash, the sale of oil, I mean, their tentacles are going to grow even longer in the region?
Yeah. George, this is the key point. Now, Iran already controls, effectively, 4 Arab capitals: Baghdad in Iraq, Sana'a in Yemen, Beirut in Lebanon, Damascus in Syria. The Iranian regime effectively controls those key Arab capitals. Not only that, funding terror throughout the region. They are on the march right now, George. They feel like the wind is at their backs. And yes, ISIS and Iran are battling right now, but not because Iran is suddenly a rational player who's fond of the West. Iran and ISIS are fighting ultimately because they want the same thing. Both want to dominate the region and lead the global jihadist movement. And I have to say, if Iran has a nuclear weapon behind it, it will lead the region, the jihadist movement in that region. There will be a bullseye on Israel's back and a bullseye on the West's back. Because look, if Iran got its way and wiped Israel off the map, we've read the book, so we know that's not going to happen. But if they did, I don't think anyone watching believes they would stop there. They're coming here next.
Chris, just a few seconds before we go to the next break, to you in Jerusalem, does this put more pressure on Israel now?
When I was reading the report, George, it's a huge pressure. If you take a look at all the nations of the world, the P5+1, agreeing to this deal with Iran, and now Israel's going to find itself isolated by the world. What it does, whether it has a military strike against Iran, it's going to pit itself against most of the world powers. And so the pressure is enormous right now on Israel.